The night was thick with fog, curling around the remains of Blackwood Asylum, an abandoned mental institution that had been shut down decades ago under mysterious circumstances. The air smelled of decay and mildew. Every local knew that those who entered never came back the same, if they came back at all. Daniel, a thrill-seeker and urban explorer, stood at the rusted gates, gripping his dying flashlight. His breath was uneven, forming small clouds in the cold night air. He had heard the stories, whispers of patients who had vanished, doctors who had experimented on the insane, and a room that spoke in voices not of this world. But he didn't believe in ghosts. Not yet. Pushing open the iron gates, they groaned in protest, echoing into the vast, silent darkness beyond. His footsteps crunched on dead leaves as he approached the entrance, a massive wooden door, slightly ajar, swaying with the wind. A strange metallic smell wafted through the opening. He hesitated. Then a whisper, "Come in." His blood ran cold. The voice was right behind him, but when he turned, there was nothing, just endless fog. The air felt heavier now, like something unseen was wrapping around his chest. Swallowing hard, he stepped inside. The asylum swallowed him whole. The door slammed shut behind Daniel. The sound echoed down the long, decaying hallway, sending dust swirling into the cold air. His flashlight flickered violently, the weak beam barely illuminating the rotting walls. Peeling paint and rusted gurneys scattered across the floor. The place reeked of old blood and something else, something rotten. Then, the whispers returned. At first, they were soft, almost like a distant breeze moving through the asylum. Then they grew clearer. Hundreds of voices. Some crying, some pleading, others laughing in a way that made his skin crawl. He froze. The beam of his flashlight trembled in his shaking hand. Then his own name, Daniel. The voice was identical to his. Same tone, same breath, as if he had just spoken from behind himself. His pulse pounded in his ears. He turned sharply, but there was nothing, just a long, dark corridor leading deeper into the asylum. The shadows seemed to move, twisting unnaturally, forming vague, shifting shapes before melting back into the darkness. Something was here with him. His breathing quickened. He forced himself to move forward, step by agonizing step. He had come to prove ghosts weren't real. But now, his hands were slick with sweat, and the air felt thick, like something unseen was pressing against his skin. Then he saw it, a room at the end of the hall. Its door was open just a crack. From inside, the whispers were the loudest, and on the door, scratched into the wood in deep, jagged letters, were the words, "Do not listen." Daniel's breath hitched. His instincts screamed at him to turn back, but his body moved forward against his will. Something was pulling him in, and the moment he stepped through the door, the whispers stopped. Complete, dead, silence, and then a slow, creaking breath came from the darkness. Something else was in the room, and it was waiting for him to speak. Daniel's heartbeat thundered in his ears as he stood frozen in the doorway of the whispering room. The air inside was thick and unnaturally still, as if the asylum itself was holding its breath. His flashlight flickered weakly, struggling against the darkness. Then a breath, slow, deep, right in front of him. Daniel couldn't see anything, but he felt it, a presence looming in the blackness, watching, waiting. Then the whispers returned, but different this time. Instead of many voices, it was only one, his own. "Daniel, I know you hear me." The voice was exactly like his own, perfectly mimicked, down to the breath between words. Daniel's stomach twisted. His fingers trembled around his flashlight. He tried to speak, but his throat locked. Somewhere deep inside he knew he must not respond. The voice spoke again, closer now. "Say something, Daniel. I just want to talk." The walls seemed to shift, as if moving with the voice's breath. His flashlight flickered, and for a fraction of a second, he saw something. A figure, tall, unmoving, standing right in front of him. But its face, there was no face. Just a smooth, empty void where eyes and a mouth should be. Daniel clenched his jaw, swallowing a scream. He stumbled back toward the doorway, but the moment his foot touched the threshold, bam, the door slammed shut behind him. The flashlight flickered out. Pitch black. And then something whispered directly into his ear. "You're already inside, Daniel. You might as well answer me." Daniel bit his lip so hard he tasted blood. The voice was coming from every direction now. He couldn't move. He couldn't breathe. His own voice laughed softly from the darkness. Then a single word echoed through the room. "Listen." The walls exploded with sound. Screams, begging, laughing. The voices of hundreds of trapped souls, all speaking over each other in a maddening, overlapping chorus. The air pushed against his skin, forcing him down to his knees. Daniel squeezed his eyes shut. His own voice pleaded from the blackness. "Just say one word, Daniel. That's all it takes." The air grew colder. A hand touched his shoulder. And then silence, except for the sound of his own breathing, and the slow, ragged breath of something standing right behind him. The hand on his shoulder was ice cold, its grip light but unnatural, as if it didn't belong to anything human. It wasn't squeezing him. It was feeling him, testing him. "Just one word, Daniel." His own voice whispered in the dark. Closer now, brushing against his ear like a cold wind. He clenched his jaw, resisting the overwhelming urge to scream. He knew, if he answered, he would belong to this place forever. His breath came in short, ragged gasps. His mind screamed for escape, but his body refused to move. It was as if something unseen was sinking into him, rooting him to the floor. Then his flashlight flickered back on, and what he saw made his blood freeze. The walls were covered in names, scratched deep into the peeling paint. Hundreds, maybe thousands. Some names were old, faded. Others were fresh, the claw marks still raw in the wood. At the bottom of the list, a new name was appearing. Daniel, carved into the wall by an invisible hand. His stomach twisted in horror. He stumbled backward, but the room seemed to stretch. The door, once just a few feet away, was now farther than before. The asylum was swallowing him. Then footsteps, slow, heavy, coming toward him from the shadows. A figure emerged, tall, unmoving, no face. The same figure he had seen before, but now it was closer. Too close. Daniel's heart pounded violently. The thing lifted a hand and pointed at him. And then his own voice spoke from the faceless void. "Say my name." Daniel choked back a cry. His mind was unraveling. The whispers clawed at his skull, pushing against his thoughts. He had to resist. But something was wrong. His hand, his fingers were fading. His skin was turning to dust, dissolving into the air like he was being erased. His arms, his chest, his reflection in the broken mirror was vanishing. The realization hit him like ice. The longer he stayed silent, the less real he became. His existence was being unwritten. His thoughts blurred. His breathing slowed. He was slipping away, piece by piece, and then the door burst open. A deafening scream filled the room, but it wasn't his. Something dragged him backward. Hard. The world spun into chaos. Shadows twisting. The whispers screaming in fury. Then, silence. Daniel hit the ground hard. His vision swam as he gasped for air, cold night air, real air. He was outside. The asylum loomed behind him, dark and silent once more. The door was closed. But just before the final sliver of darkness disappeared, he saw it, a figure standing in the doorway, watching, waiting, and as the door shut completely, he heard one final whisper, "Next time you won't escape." His hands trembled as he splashed cold water on his face, but the chill did nothing to wake him from the nightmare. He had made it out of Blackwood Asylum. He should feel safe. But deep down he knew he was not alone. The whispers hadn't stopped. They had just changed. Now they were inside his home. His phone buzzed violently on the counter, snapping him from his daze. A notification. One new voice memo. His stomach twisted. His hands felt numb as he reached the phone, his thumb hesitating over the play button. He hadn't recorded anything. With a deep breath, he pressed play. A soft crackling sound filled the room. Then a voice. His voice. "Daniel, are you listening?" The phone slipped from his hands. That wasn't a recording. That was happening right now. A cold breath touched his ear. He spun around, hard hammering. But the room was empty. Just a dim bathroom light, flickering weakly. And then his reflection moved. Not delayed. Not distorted. It blinked when he didn't. It tilted its head slightly, grinning. Daniel wasn't smiling. His breath caught in his throat. Slowly, cautiously, he lifted his shaking hand. His reflection did not. His own face stared back at him, watching, smiling, waiting. Then the mouth in the mirror moved on its own. "Say my name, Daniel." The voice wasn't his anymore. It was deeper, distorted, layered with hundreds of voices underneath. Daniel stumbled backward, crashing into the doorframe. His breath was ragged, his body trembling. He grabbed his phone, but the screen was filled with text. The same phrase, over and over. "Let me in. Let me in. Let me in." His vision blurred. His ears rang with whispers. His chest tightened, as if invisible hands were squeezing the life out of him. Then his apartment lights cut out. Everything went black. And from the darkness came the final whisper. "You never left the room, Daniel. You just brought it with you."